Marcia Wilhite. I'm Chief of the Bureau of Water for the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency in Springfield.
Okay, so Marcia, what we want to talk about is the Illinois Nutrient Reduction Strategy, what that is and where we are with that right now. Why don't you start just by telling us what this strategy is and when it was implemented?
Illinois, like many states in the Mississippi River Basin, has local water quality issues as a result of too much nitrate and phosphorus that's lost to the waters. So we can have problems with not meeting water quality standards. We can cause algae blooms that make it not good to recreate in waters, can cause problems for fish and other aquatic life that live in the waters. Too much nitrate becomes a problem for drinking water. We have a drinking water standard that could be exceeded if there's too much nitrate in nearby waters. We also contribute nitrogen and phosphorus that go to the Mississippi River, go down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, and contribute to a large low oxygen zone called the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So states and U.S. EPA got together and said, how shall we approach dealing with both the issue in the Gulf as well as our local water quality issues? And the approach was for each state to come up with a strategy for how they're going to reduce those losses of nitrate and phosphorus to water. So Illinois began working on what has now become called the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. Last year, approximately March, we got the University of Illinois to begin with a science assessment. What amount of nitrogen and phosphorus is being lost to waters? And when you look at what's leaving the state, what are the amounts, what are the sources, and then starting to look at what kinds of practices might be put in place that would reduce those losses. So the University of Illinois worked up that science assessment. It's been presented to them. We being Illinois EPA and the Illinois Department of Agriculture, formed essentially a stakeholder group that we call the Nutrient Policy Working Group, and it was composed of not only government officials, but also representatives from agricultural groups, from municipal wastewater agencies, academia, technical providers such as NRCS and University Extension, and also environmental groups, citizens in our state that have an interest in this issue and have a perspective to share. So together we looked at the information that was being provided by the University of Illinois and started to work on what kinds of strategic actions would be important in reducing these losses to water. The approaches are a little bit different when you talk about wastewater agencies where you are discharging treated sewage that has nitrogen and phosphorus in it. That type of discharge is something that comes under regulation by the Clean Water Act. Illinois EPA issues permits for that sort of thing, and so that is a way of reducing losses is by limiting the amount of these pollutants that go out in the effluent. On the agricultural side, the approach is to get voluntary conservation practices and work at it that way. Illinois, among our neighboring states, is somewhat unique because we also have a component of urban stormwater that can contribute nitrogen and phosphorus to nearby waters, some of which can potentially reach the Mississippi River. When we look at it from a contribution standpoint, the biggest sources of nitrogen to nearby waters as well as the Gulf of Mexico are agricultural non-point sources. In our state, when you look at the picture for phosphorus, approximately half of the phosphorus that is lost to water comes from wastewater discharges and half comes from agricultural runoff. That kind of gives us an idea of how we need to focus our efforts. And the process that we're still engaged in putting the strategy together identifies some strategic actions to look at how we can reduce losses from wastewater discharges as well as promoting conservation practices on the agricultural side to try and address the contribution and the losses of these nitrate and phosphorus to waters. We are at the point where the policy working group looked at a draft of the strategy document in May, provided comments. We are working with the University of Illinois to format the document so it's readable and understandable by the public, and it will be going to public notice probably in a month, towards the end of August, beginning of September, and for a 30-day period where we'll receive comments from the public. And we will be working with our stakeholder partners to really alert the public to how they can review the document, how they can provide comments. And then once those comments are provided, Illinois EPA, Illinois Department of Agriculture will work together in revising the document based on the comments. And then we will have our Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy. Part of the process of finalizing the document will also be submitting it to U.S. EPA for their review. They've been looking at the strategies of all the states that have developed them in the Mississippi River Basin, and letting the states know if they have additional comments related to the strategy. But then the big work begins, and that is actually implementing what the strategic actions are. And that will be mainly starting in watersheds where the science assessment identifies that we have the highest amount of losses. So in our state, in general, the Illinois River Basin is where we're seeing the biggest amount of losses. And then there are smaller watersheds within the larger Illinois River Basin that are more significant than others. When it comes to losses from wastewater treatment plants, those losses are in watersheds that are up in the upper part of the Illinois River Basin in the Chicago region, because that's most urbanized, has the most density of wastewater treatment plants, so that's understandable. And we are already starting to work with municipal dischargers in the Fox River watershed, the DuPage River watershed, and the Des Plaines River watersheds to work on reducing primarily phosphorus losses in those watersheds. When we look at nitrate losses from agricultural activities, from agricultural runoff, the watersheds tend to be in the tile-drained areas of central Illinois, tend to lose the most nitrate to the Illinois River. When we look at phosphorus from agricultural activities, it tends to be in areas where there's a lot of a little bit more hilly regions, and you get the surface runoff because of sloping lands. And so the practices to prevent soil erosion are going to be important for losses of phosphorus. So that's generally the overview of where we are with the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. We will be providing a lot of outreach to the public in the next few months so that people are aware of what strategic actions have been proposed and get their input on it, and then more importantly, get their involvement as we begin implementation.
As far as farmers and ranchers are concerned, they would much rather do things voluntarily than be forced to do that or required to do it, regulated. And I wanted to know how the Keep It for the Crop or KIC program that they have put in place here, how that works into this and how that's helping to educate farmers and ranchers on best practices.
I think a really unique aspect of how Illinois is approaching reducing our nutrient losses is the real leadership that has been shown by the agricultural groups in devising programs that will reach out to farmers, help them understand, what happens with the nutrients on their particular fields, and then demonstrating for them, what practices would be most helpful in reducing those losses on their own land. And that's a big part of what KIC is sponsoring, is really doing that farmer by farmer outreach to say, here's what the issue is, here's what's happening on your particular land. Let's take a look at what the application practices are that you use, what sorts of management systems exist, and really focusing on how can the farmer, minimize their environmental impact, optimize their nutrient inputs, and maximize their productivity. So I think that's a concept that is embedded in all of the work that KIC is doing. So it's going to be KIC is and will continue to be a really prime outreach tool that will help farmer by farmer, field by field, watershed by watershed promote those voluntary conservation practices. I think that I've heard the Farm Bureau say that, here's our opportunity as we look at what's needed to address nutrient losses. Here's our opportunity to really reinvigorate the conservation practice movement, show that voluntary conservation can work in Illinois and is working. The fundamental answer to your question is, I think KIC and programs like it are going to be extremely important in our success.
And thank you very much. That is Marcia Wilhite, Chief of the Illinois EPA's Bureau of Water. I'm Cindy Zimmerman.